Okay, so the next node we're going to be looking at is the DepthFade node, and we're going to cover this in a lot more depth in the input data examples. We're actually going to look at what this is doing and how, but effectively what it does is it's only usable on translucent and additive materials, so we're set here on translucent, and it reads from the depth buffer, and so it works out how far away the pixel being rendered is from the opaque pixels behind them. So if I do a little example, let's say we have a flat surface, and then if I use a different color, we have a translucent plane that cuts through it, and then our camera or our eye here is looking at our two objects. As we're looking at this pixel here, there is quite a big distance between these two surfaces, and that's the two bits of data we're reading, so the pixel being rendered and the opaque pixel behind. But as we look exactly here, they're the same distance away. So if we subtract the first distance away from the second distance, when we get the coincident, when they align, we'll get a value of 0. And so what we can do is we can plug that into our opacity channel, and we'll get a nice soft fade between our two objects. And you can see that kind of happening here. So fade distance is giving us how much is it fading, or how quickly or how close to the two objects need to be in order for fading to happen, and that's what's happening here. The opacity input is just an opacity value, so whatever our opacity is doing will give us that result. Personally, I don't tend to use the opacity input. I tend to multiply my opacity by my depth fade, and it's exactly the same. I just like to keep things separately this way. So if this is already set to the default is set to 1, it's just going to be taking our fade values and giving us a result between 0 and 1, and we can just multiply that into our opacity channel. But actually it's exactly the same as using that as an input. Just gives us control of the overall opacity. As I say, we'll go into more depth in that in the input examples, because it's using some of the input data to calculate what's happening, and we'll kind of recreate this node from first principles. But as a simple way of adding depth or a soft fade between two objects, we have the depth fade node. It doesn't have its own example, but while we're here talking about it, CameraDepthFade, this is a function, and this works in a very similar way, but rather than being comparison between two objects, is a comparison between the camera and the object. So as we get close to the camera, it fades out nicely. So if you've got any large smokes or fogs, that kind of thin translucent thing that you don't really want to clip through, you can use the CameraDepthFade to fade that out as you get close to it, which works quite nicely. So, and again, we'll cover sort of how to make that from first principles. Okay.